everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know I'm extremely late in offering you all my thorough review of Hogwarts Legacy, but many of you muggles insisted I make one, so better late than never. It's been over a decade since we got a Wizarding World video game, and thus my expectations were high. The last two video games made by EA, Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, were basically discount Call of Duty with wands. People were hungry for a new Wizarding World game, and I was one of them. After all, Harry Potter is one of the most successful and popular franchises of all time. Let's jump in and talk about the main plot. The game is set in the 1800s in the UK, which I'm totally fine with. A lot of IPs don't expand and always seem to stay within a certain timeline, causing staleness and contradictions. With this game taking place in the 1800s, we are able to have some breathing room while still being in the same Wizarding World that we know and love. In all honesty, I was very dubious going into the game already, because I already knew from the synopsis that our student arrives at Hogwarts for their first year as a 5th year. My head was buzzing with so many questions. What reasoning did my character have for starting Hogwarts in their 5th year? It was absurd and unheard of. The game starts off with a bang, with your main character getting attacked by a dragon, and you see a character murdered in front of your eyes, thus causing your character to see Thestrals guiding the carriage. That was an incredible intro. It definitely captured everyone's attention. My dubious mind was instantly changed. Sadly, my original instinct of the game was correct. Let's continue. Like I said, your character is a late bloomer and is accepted to Hogwarts as a 5th year for their very first year, and your character discovers that he or she can see traces of ancient magic. Your character learns some basic spells, which, as this witch or wizard is taking owls the same year, should have already known about it, but I digress. The characters meet some friends and foes along the way, including Ranrock, an evil goblin. The MC discovers some random chambers within Hogwarts, finds some deceased Hogwarts professors on porches who are keepers of the ancient magic, and he or she has to overcome 4 trials by the keepers to prove him or herself worthy of knowing the secrets of the ancient magic. Along the way, our characters see memories of Isadora Morganach, a former Hogwarts student who also started in her 5th year and possessed the same abilities as our main character. We discovered that Isadora was trying to eliminate people's sadness with ancient magic. This included students. However, she was increasing her own power and was murdered by one of the keepers because she went gaga. Whilst all of this is happening, some other weird stuff like visiting Ollivander's wand shop in Hogsmeade, creating a new wand, which again leaves me scratching my own head, we discover that Goblin Rebellion leader Ranrock has discovered where Isadora left her repository and turns himself into a dragon because obviously in order to prove to wizards that goblins are superior, they must transform into another magical creature. Just to really prove how good goblins are by not being a goblin to fight. Anywho, our character fights Dragon, Ranrock wins and destroys him. Our character decides to either seal away the magic or absorb it for themselves. Either way, Professor Fig dies, no matter what you choose, and Headmaster Black and Professor Weasley hold a rather monotone eulogy, and the game ends basically just like that. It is incredibly lackluster. The eulogy only shows around 10 students in the Great Hall as well. I think it was such a deflated scene because the developers spent so much time trying to insert all the different characters without really giving any of them any substance and checking diversity quota boxes. It's like they ran out of ideas by the time they wrote the eulogy scene and were like, yeah, this'll do. We do get to take our OWLs, or owls, which again, I don't understand how our character passes with only 1 year to learn magic when everyone else has 5 years to learn. And then Professor Weasley awards 100 house points to your house, thus winning the House Cup, and the end. The owl exams aren't even playable, it's more of a cutscene than anything, no puzzles or quizzes, nothing. Overall, the main story was all over the place. Why does our character start off in their 5th year? Did they not possess magic until 15? Did they decide not to go to Hogwarts until then? Is never directly answered, and like I said, I was questioning this from the moment I read the synopsis. The ancient magic is hardly even discussed properly, as if everyone wouldn't know about it if it's been around for hundreds of years, especially since Isadora was using students to become more powerful by removing their sadness and depression. People were bound to find out. And why didn't Isadora understand that our experiences through life are what molds us? And in no way is our main character more powerful than Dumbledore, Voldemort, or Grindelwald, so sit down if you're going to even argue that. This game's plot falls flat, and ultimately I think that this is because Rowling had no direct involvement with this game. Look what happened with Cursed Child. She didn't write that one either. The people who wrote the plot just didn't have enough creativity and shouldn't have been tasked with the honor of creating a Wizarding World game. And let's actually break down the final boss fight. Why is Ranrock telling us that the wizards and witches won't control him, but then turns into a dragon? Since when can goblins turn into dragons? Is that a magical ability that they possess? Is that what happens when someone absorbs Isadora's repository? Does that mean my character can turn into a dragon too? I also can't find any information on this, so who knows? Do enlighten me. Moving right along, the forced diversity is so jarring that it often pulls you out of the wizarding world. This game is set in Scotland in the 1800s. There were little to no Asian and black people, nor were there any open and proud LGBTQ characters. This was the Victorian era, after all, and yet we found many characters that were incredibly out of place and were simply thrown in there for quota. Cue Sweet Baby Inc. If you didn't know what Sweet Baby Inc. is, don't worry, I got you covered. Sweet Baby Inc. is a narrative development and consultation studio with the mission of telling better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry. Their aim is to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone. In a nutshell, a couple things that are wrong with AAA games can be attributed to Sweet Baby Inc. and other companies with similar agendas. Now, although they haven't directly stated that they worked on Hogwarts Legacy, you can see that Warner Bros. Games and Avalanche Studio Groups are their clients. My guess is that due to all the J.K. Rowling trans controversy, they didn't want their name attributed. And speaking of trans, we have a transgender barmaid run the Hogshead Inn. Why? This added nothing to the story except a checkmark in the quota for the developers.
Took them a second to realise I was actually a witch, not a wizard.
But to really mess with my mind, I went down the rabbit hole and read through the entirety of Making of Hogwarts Legacy and Galloping Gargoyles did I find more information. First off, did you know that there might be a villain that is a they-them? Sylvanus Selwyn is an Ashwinder and works as a lieutenant for Rookwood. Quick-witted and fashionable, they love the finer things in life and have a flair for the dramatic. In the game, he is referred to as he, however in the book he is a they. Unless this is a typo in the book, we got ourselves a non-binary character in the 1800s. How progressive. Much to the dismay of many Hogwarts Legacy fans around the world, Professor Garlick is a lesbian. You don't know this in the video game, but the companion book dishes it all out. She is yet to meet the right witch, but at present is perfectly content with her life at Hogwarts. That's right, you simp, she's not interested in you. You remember Nora? She was the lady who helped her character uncover the Merlin trials. She too is a lesbian. Nora met her wife Priya at Hogwarts, and the two have taken up residence in the Three Broomsticks. I'll be honest, I'm surprised that they had Professor Fig, a white male, die with such dignity and honor in this day and age. Knowing what I know, my question to Avalanche and Warner Bros. Games is, what happened to all these LGBTQ and racially diverse characters by the time the 1900s happened? Were they all sent home? Were they murdered? Sounds like someone didn't think this one through. My female character was constantly being referred to as a they-them. Why? Was it because the developers were lazy and didn't have multiple dialogues available? Was it because we can't assume gender anymore? The game specifically says that female and male do exist because you have to have one of each to breed the magical creatures. So which is it then? Do our characters not have genders with their they-them pronouns? Or do they? The companion book even says that the 19th century period is different enough from today's world that the characters, locations, and costumes would be entirely new for the wizarding world. However, the setting of 1800s Britain still needed to allow the dialogue, story content, and characters to mesh with the more modern sensibilities so that today's players can understand and relate to the game's world. To me, this makes no sense. You're trying to keep Britain in the 1800s, but you're adding all these modern things to the game, with even purple hair being an option. Not to mention, all these LGBT characters weren't even allowed to be themselves back in the day. If we are supposed to be fully immersed, it should be historically accurate. Players do not need to relate to various characters based on appearance. Do you relate to aliens and monsters in other games simply on their appearance? To me, this is incredibly stupid and honestly a bit racist. And sexist, if you will. There are morals and personalities and ways characters react to situations that can make a player relate to them. And lastly, these modern audience ideas are just the developers self-inserting them into the game. That's really it. They just want to be able to see themselves. Let's talk about our main character. First off, our main character that we play as is immediately amazing at everything, even though he or she starts off in their 5th year. Somehow they possess ancient magical abilities, making them better than everyone else, even though the others have spent the last 5 years practicing the same spells. Everyone you interact with almost immediately trusts you or changes their negative beliefs about your character almost instantly. Then again, this seems to be the way for RPG games. However, I personally feel that the main character could have had a lot more depth to them had they grown. The MC is practically a Mary Sue. Our character has no personality whatsoever that by the end of the game, I had no idea what my character was even like. I understand that this is because you can roleplay your own character, but even when you couldn't and there were cutscenes, my supposedly 15-year-old character was incredibly stoic, void of all feeling, and just all around reserved. There was no suspense because he or she was never in any real trouble throughout the entire game. Furthermore, why is it that our character all of a sudden has a personality when he or she becomes Professor Black? In all honesty, that was the most fun I had playing as my character, when my character was pretending to be someone else.
Ahem! The polyjuice potion's wearing off. I best get out of sight.
Moving along with the physical characteristics of the game, you had the ability to change the scars and freckles in hairstyle and hair color throughout the entire game, but you couldn't change any other important features such as the shape of their nose or smile, which leads me to ask, why is it that the character we created looked nothing like what we received in the game? My character looked so bad that the running joke was that her nose was messed up in my Twitch chat and her eyes looked demonic. I mean, this is what I created, and then this is what I got in the game. There were many complaints on the internet that the players' characters did not look correct, especially the female faces. One last thing about my main character, the voice was so weird. I had adjusted my female voice from default and the AI totally made her sound robotic and made her even more void of emotion.
And I'm still not sure what it all means. What I do know is that my ability allows me to travel through these windows I see.
Not to mention that when she was shouting spells, her voice would go back to the normal default female sound.
Revelio. Revelio. Fringo. Expelliarmus. Incendio. Expelliarmus.
And don't get me even started on the weird hand-holding posture. Moving right along, there are far too many characters in this game that I honestly don't even care about. None of them are even remotely interesting because there are so many diverse characters in a school that takes place in Scotland. Not much characterization is actually given to each one. Some characters felt like a discounted version of an established canon character. For example, Poppy reminds me of Newt Scamander. She's a Hufflepuff who loves magical creatures and is advocating for their protection. Ominous Gaunt is literally a relative of Lord Voldemort, just casually thrown in there because why not? He could have been an interesting character without his connection to the Gaunt family. I think he may even break some lore with his existence if this game were to be considered canon. This goes for the two Weasley characters. Their connection to the Weasleys was unnecessary and was simply there for fans to freak out about as a member berry. Fun fact for you guys, Professor Weasley is Miss Patmore from Downton Abbey, and also Lee Jordan actor Luke Youngblood voices Everett. And also Professor Sharp is literally Snape and Sirius put together. It's insanely unoriginal. And after reading the companion book, I know that I was actually correct. All these characters were designed to be like already established characters. How boring is that? Of all the characters, Sebastian was the more interesting, even though people were idolizing him and fantasizing about him on the internet. Really, people, he's a 15-year-old imaginary character who also murdered his uncle. Pull yourselves together. The only interesting character was Professor Hecat, who is the current professor of defense against the dark arts and a former unspeakable at the Ministry of Magic. She was wounded by time and looks far older than she actually is. I would have loved to see more of her backstory, but unfortunately, we get nothing more than a few sentences about her. Given the fact that we had multiple Harry Potter video games back in the day, I was expecting some sort of interaction with other students roaming around Hogwarts. I was incredibly disappointed. Let's do a quick comparison at how the previous games had fun and quirky interactions with our main character. In the early games, your main character would bump into NPCs and they would say, "oh," or other phrases. Some lines repeated themselves, but at least there was a response. The Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix video game did a great job at this, where if you walked into someone, they were pushed out of the way and verbally responded, and depending on what house they were in, their rudeness varied. For example, some Slytherin students would say, "you belong in St. Mungo's" to Harry, in which he would reply with, "whatever." In Half-Blood Prince, you could be sprinting around and completely knock yourself or someone over. If they were carrying books, they would drop it. And that was back in 2007 and 2009 respectively. These games came out over a decade ago, and instead of progressing with the interaction, it would appear that we regressed. In Hogwarts Legacy, if you ran into someone who was sitting down, they would hardly react except lean back and put a hand to the chest as if they were in a gang. The best interaction I saw was an NPC sidestepping a spell aimed at them or looking at you funny. And the reason for this is that the developers felt the Hogwarts would be protected from breaking or blowing things up. Let's talk specifically about Peeves. Peeves was never in the films, but he was pretty prominent in the novels and was even in the first 3 EA video games. In those games, he would harass Harry, and you would have to fight him a few times. He would also jump scare. This game had the potential to do just that, and it never happened. Peeves cannot be interacted with. He is there within Hogwarts on a loop, but he doesn't harass our character like Peeves used to in the old EA games. He just annoys other students who, again, we can't even interact with. You can't lift furniture like you were able to do so in some of the EA video games. The best you can do is eat some food, drink some butterbeer, pet some cats. and spin some globes. How fun. It just feels empty and soulless, like you're the only one there. Why is it that in 2002 Chamber of Secrets video game, you can walk up to someone and trade jelly beans for potion ingredients and chocolate frog cards? That would have been an extra fun element, trading chocolate frog cards with other students. Sure, I can be nitpicky here, but when you have over a decade of waiting, you think they would have incorporated beloved things that already existed in previous Wizarding World games and add their own unique twist to it. Another specific example of the lack of interaction is when I rescued a random wizard from a spider. He doesn't even say thank you or anything to me, no interaction whatsoever. As soon as he's off my screen, he blinks and disappears. No interaction whatsoever. It was incredibly lame. For a game called Hogwarts Legacy, it sure isn't set within Hogwarts that much. The only classes in the game are in cutscenes. You cannot just walk into a classroom and attend a class with in-game puzzles. Nope, none of that. We don't actually experience any learning in the class. We tap 4 buttons to learn a new spell and that is it. But let's talk about Hogwarts itself. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione refers to Salazar Slytherin as
He lived 1,000 years ago.
Salazar was a founder of Hogwarts, so we know when Hogwarts was founded. So why is it that in Harry Potter, and even in Fantastic Beasts, the school still has gargoyles, knights, and other aspects of the medieval times? And on any media, be it the original books or the movies, do we see one bit of the Victorian-era themed architecture that we see in the video game? At one point, it honestly looks like a museum with the bones of a magical creature on display. So where does interior architecture and theme go? This is another thing that pulled me out of the video game, and it made it very clear that I was not in Hogwarts. It just didn't make sense that part of the castle was medieval and gothic, whilst the other was Victorian. Did the developers expect me to understand the Hogwarts transition from medieval to Victorian, and then back to medieval once more? Okay, so this is cool, but I don't like that it's all circular like this. This makes no sense. Even the trials the main character faced felt out of place within Hogwarts. They were extremely similar to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. The Tomb Guardians are very similar to the Pensive Guardians. If you played that game, you can probably see what I'm referring to. Not to mention, the sound effects in these various chambers are very Sith-like. It's not a new sound.
No, Brian, stop.
The last trial is extremely similar to the scene in Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows Part 1 where Hermione reads the tales of the 3 brothers. It's like they were copying the movie. Don't worry, there were some fun things in this game. The dialogue between your MC and the NPCs changes depending on what house you're in. Depending on the house, you find the map chamber differently as well. For example, Ravenclaw explores the Arrowing, Hufflepuff goes to Azkaban, Gryffindor joins the Headless Hunt, and Slytherin teams up with a house elf to find an item. I think this is a great way of increasing replayability so players can experience and select the different options. However, you might think that all these variations were for nothing if you expected a different outcome at the end of the game. There were a lot of obvious Easter eggs to Fantastic Beasts as well, with your character being able to capture magical creatures in a bag and release them in a very large room, just like Newt's suitcase. I think the developers wanted to bring more people to the mostly unpopular Fantastic Beasts franchise. Instead of Newt's suitcase though, we used the room of requirement to brew potions, upgrade our clothing material, grow plants, and contain all of our magical creatures that in turn provide us with hairs, feathers, etc. to use for various things. It does make sense to use the room of requirement in this fashion, and I have to say, they did a rather good job with it. You can customize the decorum to your liking and name your magical creatures. If you're a fan of crafting games, then this was perfect for you. Let's talk about the open world within the game. Exploring Honeydukes in Hogsmeade was an absolute treat. There was a lot to look at. The details within the Victorian-era ads and posters were especially fun to look at. This is a perfect example of incorporating the Victoria-era theme and the Wizarding World together. Seeing Hogwarts in the background as you stroll around Hogsmeade is absolutely beautiful as well. The outside grounds and parts of Hogwarts that I've seen in the films are in the video game, and it is lovely to walk around and explore. That is immersive, especially seeing the wing boars at the gates of Hogwarts. I'm gonna be nitpicky here, but like I said before, why is there an Ollivander store in Hogsmeade? That's not canonical in the books. Was it just for the sake of the plot in the video game? That seems lazy in my opinion. Where did the store go if it's not there in the 1900s? There was no second store ever mentioned in the books, and if we are going to be more critical towards the lore, then in Chapter 5 of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Hogsmeade is mentioned as the only wizarding village in Britain. Therefore, the other villages can't exist. And sure, you can make the argument that these places are called hamlets, but come on, that is a really weak argument. My biggest problem with the world was that it was too open. It was so open and vast that the gameplay yet again felt soulless, and I completely disagree with those saying that it felt like you were right at Hogwarts and the Wizarding World. It felt far from it. The open world felt too big for the reason that these villages and settlements didn't actually exist. Personally, I would have focused less on creating this massive empty world for the player to get lost in, and instead focus on a really interactive Hogwarts and Hogsmeade, and if needed, a village here and there. Not every story needs to be about saving the Wizarding World. It's like all these superhero movies are all about saving the world rather than simply evolving as a person. You can be learning spells, interacting with friends, staying out of trouble, and within Hogwarts itself. Honestly, the ideas are endless. This Hogwarts Legacy world is very lonely when it's just you in it. Your overall progress can be tracked in the Challenges tab and is divided up into 5 categories: Combat, Quest, Exploration, Field Guide pages, and the Room of Requirement. Unlike most RPG games, Hogwarts Legacy doesn't allow you to level up by defeating X amount of enemies. Instead, you have to complete certain challenges for your Field Guide book. We can actually look at the Field Guide pages in our Challenges tab and see what we need to do to progress in this game. If you collect X amount of pages, you gain clothing. However, it's important to note that you won't gain any experience after you complete the 100 pages. The rest are simply to help you complete the game 100%. Every time you level up, you increase your maximum health, you gain talent points, you gain the ability to equip higher level gear, and you unlock new side quests and activities. The maximum level you can be is 40. In all honesty, I don't like that defeating enemies doesn't allow you to level up, and that is because the side quests were dull. I'll get to that in a bit. Dueling does progress relatively nicely, and I found that there were some great combos that you could perform once you were powerful enough. However, I don't like the cooldown system, and it was incredibly dumb that other witches and wizards were not attacking you at the same time. It was like they were waiting for their turn. There were dueling feats and tasks for you to accomplish throughout the game, such as killing X amount of goblins, keeping 2 enemies airborne for a certain amount of time, and in return you unlock certain cosmetics. Being able to use potions to save my own skin was fun. It gave potion brewing a purpose. I also loved how we could incorporate herbology into defending ourselves. I even protected myself with venomous tentacula from Inferi. The super abilities from ancient magic were incredibly fun, such as smacking your enemies around. However, I think my favorite of the super abilities is where you are able to use Accio on a spider and shrink them so you can stomp on the spider. Is incredibly badass and just so satisfying, and that might just be because I detest spiders. Not to mention, casting the Imperious Curse on other foes and having your enemies attack each other was so fun. I would just sit back and relax and yell at them to fight to the death. Fight each other, fight each other, fight, fight, fight! No! Yeah! I also enjoyed transforming enemies into exploding barrels that could then be chucked at other enemies and thus killing a lot of them in one go. There are even battle arenas to unlock and complete that can be difficult. In there, you can use all the unforgivable curses even if you don't have them unlocked yet. There were a ton of side quests in this game, and unfortunately the coolest things to happen were in the cutscenes. I think my favorite side quest was with Poppy and freeing the dragon. Sadly, in my opinion, these side quests did not give more layers to either the companions or our main character. There was a quest called Follow the Butterflies, and it was so on the nose, and it was created just for the member berries. Yeah, it was funny when the character said,
"You want me to
Oh my God.
follow the butterflies?"
But it also felt cheap. Remember, we are in the 1800s trying to separate from Harry's story, but there are all these cheap little member berries in the way. There was also one random quest involving collecting demiguise statues, because the caretaker hates them. At least one of the quests involved sneaking around Hogwarts at night, past curfew. You had to sneak around prefects and staff, yet once the quest was completed, you can still wander around at night at Hogwarts without any staff or students around. They all completely vanish at night and reappear when the sun is out. There should be prefects around or staff or something. Instead, there are occasional ghosts and talking armor. It just doesn't make sense. When we are tasked with finding out the headmaster's password, we are told by Professor Fig to use some polyjuice potion. Like what? Why wouldn't a professor know the headmaster's password? How else would you be able to communicate with him? And why would the professor advertise to use the polyjuice potion when it is banned? And in the same quest, our character then becomes the headmaster with the polyjuice potion, and whilst this is the funniest part of the entire game, our character has more personality in that entire quest than the entire game, like I said before. Why is that? And as I said before, we didn't actually sit down and take our OWLs. Our main character didn't know anything when it came to basic standard spells like Alohomora. She had to learn it from the caretaker, discount but nice Filch. I understand that this was for the gameplay, but it just didn't make any sense, especially when you learn it in year 1. There were a ton of mind-numbing puzzles such as Alohomora, astrology, finding the keys and matching them to the portraits, slapping keys into a cabinet to find house tokens, and arithmetic challenges to unlock certain areas. There are even puzzles that had your character moving cubes around to get to the other side of the floor. These all felt very tedious and repetitive. The Merlin trials were located all over the open world and were fun at first, but after the 30th trial, you get bored easily. There are 95 trials in this game, but there are only 9 types of trials. That is extremely repetitive gameplay, and yes, they sometimes did vary in difficulty, but the gameplay was still there. When you first began, you start off with 20 spots in your gear storage. The trial milestones found in the Challenges tab expands your gear slots by 4. However, this only applies up until you have 40 gear slots. After that, the Merlin trials are basically pointless except for the sake of completing the game 100%. Then there was also Summoner's Court, a minigame, and I sound like a broken record, but back in the EA games, you could play chess or exploding snap or even gobstones. That would have been a perfect to play in Hogwarts Legacy since it was mentioned in the books many times. On the plus side, there were many spells that you could perform in this game, from simple charms like Lumos to combat spells to figuration spells that were only able to be used in the Room of Requirement. My biggest gripe with the spells was that we couldn't use the charm Alohomora right off the bat. This spell is learned in year 1. Again, why doesn't our character know how to use it at the start of the game? This is just poor storytelling, especially when they're supposed to be getting caught up, as they are starting as a year 5 student.
Revelio, 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 Revelio.
Revelio. Need I say more? It is the spell that is used the most. It's like every 10 seconds in this game. Thus, finding the field guide pages is quite a chore and extremely boring. It is so repetitive. Cast Revelio as you explore, listen for the chime, find the page, and repeat. It grew tiresome very, very quickly.
Revelio.
Hengist of Woodcraft. I actually have that chocolate frog. I entirely enjoyed casting Unforgivable Curses, who wouldn't, but it really didn't make sense for many 15-year-old children knowing how to properly cast these spells. Ominous Sebastian and our main character, and no consequences for our main character for using them. She's a literal serial killer, even though if you use any of these curses, it's a one-way ticket to Azkaban. Not to mention our character straight up can use the Unforgivable Curse right in front of Professor Fig, and not have any repercussions. Sebastian is in big trouble for killing his own uncle, but our character has no issues. Again, make it make sense.
Avada Kedavra!
And also, funny enough, your enemies never use these spells against you. Additionally, whilst the super roll option is really cool and badass, it's like your character is apparating, which you cannot do as your character is not 17 yet and you cannot apparate in Hogwarts. They're skipping Quidditch?
Enough! It's not as though I've banned flying altogether, but don't tempt me.
Let's talk about flying. You can't land on the roof of Hogwarts because it says not available right now. And you can't enter the astronomy tower via broomstick, which would also have been really cool to just land on the tower or jump on the broom and take off. I also find that flying the creatures was more clunky than flying the actual brooms. I encountered a bug where I could fly off just outside the headmaster's office, but I couldn't land back, thus forcing me to abandon my quest. And no Quidditch? At least make it a DLC or something, but no. Real reason we don't have Quidditch in the game is because of the upcoming Quidditch Champions, the Fortnite wannabe Quidditch game. And even so, the game footage was leaked back in 2018 and the game was released in 2023. I'm pretty sure they could have developed Quidditch and had made it enjoyable to play. Instead, you have random racing quests and help a store in Hogsmeade test their broomsticks. Maybe one day they'll remake the Quidditch World Cup game. I mean, how annoying is it that your broom gets tired after flying for 1 minute and then you have to recharge the speed just because? No Quidditch, no chess, no exploding snap or gobstones. The disappointment in already existing activities is limitless in this game. But hey, at least we can pop balloons, alright? The clothing. Don't get me started on the clothing. First off, they are extremely ugly and very unflattering. I mean, besides the fact that NPCs are already ugly in the first place, the clothing does not help one little bit. You would just travel around the entire world, finding clothing in the most random places. Your combat skills increase by the type of clothing you wear, and this makes no sense. It's like, oh, if I wear this corset, I immediately have more health. Like, right on. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all bad. You could accidentally hurt yourself if you were too close to a flammable barrel. Oh. To me, that is pretty funny. I also enjoyed the change of seasons and how each season had something special. There was Halloween and beautiful leaves in the fall, Christmas decorations and snow for the winter, and lots of green for spring and summer. I also really liked that the developers paid attention to the book details and adapted the game to it, such as climbing through the portrait hole of the Fat Lady for Gryffindor Tower, which was not in the films, by the way. We also get to see the other house common rooms depending on what your house was. They really went into a lot of detail and listened to what J.K. Rowling had said about each common room. I love that there were honking daffodils in various areas of the open world. And like I said before, we even get to see Peeves again, which we haven't seen since the 2004 EA Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban game. He was redesigned, and it was a little nod to the books, and it was fun. I really liked that there was a dungeon with ghosts inside of it dancing. This was a subtle callback to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, where the main trio go to the Death Day party instead of the Halloween feast. We never saw this in any other media except the books, so it was definitely fun to see where it would take place. To me, it wasn't an obvious member berry because you had to go and explore the dungeons to actually find this one area. I have to give credit where it is due. The developers even tried to incorporate both versions, the film and the book, of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In the book, Sirius Black is captured and locked in the 7th floor, west tower of the castle, where Professor Flitwick's office is located. However, in the movie, Sirius is locked up in a cell in some random dark tower. Well, how can you have both versions in the game? Well, the developers then decided to create a story in which a charms professor found it convenient to house various creatures on the balcony above his office, likely as subjects on which some of his upperclassmen could practice experimental charms. This gave a reason for why the professor's office, or more accurately, the cell above the professor's office, would one day be able to keep supposed dangerous criminals and the balcony outside as a prime location to land a hippogriff. Lastly, it really shows that the developers did pay attention to both book and film, with all the moving portraits, tapestries, and other decorum throughout the areas that do resemble the medieval Hogwarts that we know and love. The graphics in the game are hit and miss. Things in a distance seem to look sharp and detailed, such as Hogwarts Castle, but up close, looking at the characters' faces, not so much. They all have dead eyes, or seem to resemble the chickens from Chicken Run. And not to mention all the of-age characters, including the staff, were not aesthetically pleasing. The creatures did look great for the most part, but the feathers of some of the winged creatures were not looking good. And not to mention, there are a lot of graphic glitches within this game that were highly enjoyable. I'll be honest, I think the removed features would have improved the game greatly. There would have been a house point system, which was basically a morality system. If you used unforgivable curses, you would lose 100 points for your house. This might have prevented players from offing every other foe they met and added more to dueling. Not to mention, there were no house points in this game in the first place, and that was just silly and stupid. There could have been a possible romance, which would have given the characters in the game more substance. It is not clear if the romance was between your character or the NPCs. Additionally, a removed feature was that everyone and their mother warned you about ominous Gaunt. Everyone disliked him. And lastly, there was supposed to be more companions such as Imelda and Everett, which I'll be honest, as of all these characters were one-dimensional, this wasn't a bad feature to remove. The music in the main menu is enchanting. I absolutely loved it and feels like I'm in the Wizarding World. The overall score is great for the most part. I really love that the developers gave subtle nods to the composers of the Wizarding World films.
Ready for the sorting ceremony?
You get musical nods from not only John Williams, but Nicholas Hooper and even Fantastic Beasts composer James Newton Howard. There were some tracks that I thought were annoying after a while, such as the Hogsmeade theme and a string segment, but that is just me being nitpicky. Hogwarts Legacy was leaked 5 years in advance, and yet with all that time that they had, they just seemed to hit a wall on certain things. Is it possible that the developers spent all their money making sure that Hogwarts and other notable things looked incredible and then ran out of money? Or were they told to stop with the details, or were they never finished the game? I'm not really sure, but for a game that's been developed for so many years, I would have expected more. Hogwarts Legacy was the highest selling game of 2023, and it's not because of the gameplay. Between the boycott, the boycott, and the lack of Wizarding World games, everyone went out and bought a copy. The game was enjoyable to stream with you all, but it was definitely underwhelming. The gameplay was repetitive, the story was weak. There were some enjoyable things within the game, but they were not enough to ignore the massive flaws. Thank you all for watching, and let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed the game. See you next time. Bye!